It didn't come with a thunder. There was no dramatic music. No spotlight from the heavens, no angel whispering, "This is it." It looked like an ordinary moment, a blink, a pause, a breath. But in that breath, something shifted. The kind of shift you don't notice until the silence that follows feels different. Until the way you see yourself softly, subtly fractures and reforms. And that's the kind of moment I want to talk to you about today. We all imagine transformation like a movie scene. Some giant sweeping event that turns the page for us. But in reality, the biggest changes often come in stillness. A sentence overheard. A door left slightly ajar. A heartbreak that doesn't scream but settles into your bones. Maybe it was the first time you heard someone say you don't have to earn love. Maybe it was watching someone walk away and realizing you didn't want to follow. For me, it was sitting alone with my own silence and realizing it had never been quiet, just muffled by distraction. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And maybe that's what these moments really are. Fate cracking open a small space in the timeline, just enough for light to leak in. That light doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it blinds you. Sometimes it burns, but it always reveals. You see, no one teaches us to recognize those moments. We're taught to chase change, not sit still enough to feel when it's already happening. We're conditioned to want signs, symbols, grand awakenings. But your transformation might look like drinking your coffee slower, like hearing your own thoughts and not panicking, like forgiving someone who didn't ask to be forgiven. I remember reading a story once about a woman who survived a car crash and said the moment her life changed wasn't when the car hit, but when she opened her eyes and realized she was still alive. "That was the first time I decided to actually live," she said. Isn't that wild? The moment came after the impact, as if the soul waited to whisper its message until the chaos quieted down. Let me ask you something. When did it happen for you? Not the day your life changed on paper, but the breath, the pause, the internal switch no one else saw. Do you remember the second it clicked, even if everything around you looked the same? I want you to hold that memory now. Don't force it. Let it come. Maybe it's still forming. Maybe it hasn't happened yet. But I promise when it does, you'll feel the air change. Before everything shifted, there was a rhythm you didn't question. You woke up and stepped into a version of life that felt like yours because it was familiar, not because it was true. The people around you seemed stable, the choices you made seemed logical, the path ahead looked just clear enough to follow, yet something deep inside was quietly unsettled. You may not have noticed it then. It's easy to ignore a whisper when the world is noisy. But if you trace it back, you might remember moments where time slowed for no reason, where a question lingered a little longer in your chest, where you caught your own reflection and felt like a stranger. These are not random. These are preludes to awakening. You see, the universe doesn't yank you into change. It invites you, subtly, repeatedly, through discomfort, through coincidence, through patterns you swore you'd never repeat but did anyway. Have you ever asked yourself why you kept ending up in the same emotional room with different people, different jobs, different settings, but the same inner feeling? That's the loop. That's the part of you waiting to be interrupted. Neville Goddard said, "You must assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, but what if you never gave yourself permission to wish at all? What if the blueprint you're following was written by fear or culture or survival?" So much of the life we build isn't consciously chosen. It's inherited, absorbed, copied. And in that unconscious repetition, the soul begins to dim. Not die, just wait. That's the stage before everything changes. A kind of sacred sleepwalking. And the most miraculous part? The moment right before the shift often feels like the most hopeless one. It's the collapse before the bloom. The silence before the soul speaks clearly. In that space, you might feel like nothing is working, like everything you tried led nowhere. But what if that sense of nothingness wasn't the end, but the clearing? the making of space for something more aligned. Bob Proctor once said most people are not going after what they want. They're going after what they think they can have. And that's what traps us. You lived within what you believed was possible, not what your soul deeply desired. The world before the shift is deceptive. It looks stable, but it's fragile. It looks safe, but it's stifling. And one day, something nudges it and the whole illusion begins to tremble. Maybe you're feeling that tremble now. Maybe this is your pause, your breath, your moment. You don't need to do anything drastic. Yet just notice, just feel. That's how it starts. That's how the before becomes the after. The fracture didn't start with an earthquake. It started with a question you couldn't ignore anymore. A quiet crack in your sense of certainty, not loud enough to break you, just loud enough to make you stop. You might have looked fine too. The world, smiling, functioning, performing the rituals of your role. But inside, something no longer clicked. You didn't feel like the version of yourself that others saw. There was a split not between right and wrong, but between real and performed. That split is sacred. It is the birthplace of self-awareness. And once it begins, you can't go back. You can try to numb it. You can fill the silence with distractions, noise, scrolling, perfectionism, even spiritual bypassing. But the soul knows. And the more you ignore it, the louder it knocks. At first, the fracture feels like a problem, a weakness, a glitch, but over time you realize it's an invitation. A call to remember who you were before the world taught you how to be. Eckhart Tolle speaks of the pain body, the accumulated emotional energy from past traumas that lives in us and feeds off unconsciousness. When your fracture surfaces, your pain body flares up, old wounds return, old patterns replay. Not because you're failing, but because you're finally aware. That's the gift hidden in the fracture. It makes the invisible visible. You start noticing what drains you, who silences you, where you shrink. And the more you see, the more uncomfortable it becomes to pretend. There's a moment in every awakening where you realize you can't unsee what you've seen. That's when the fear shows up. Fear of losing your comfort, your identity, your people. But what if what you're losing is just the version of you that was never really alive? What if the fracture is the first glimpse of your wholeness? You are not broken, you're breaking open. And in that raw space, you meet your truth. Not the truth they taught you, but the one you buried to belong. That truth doesn't arrive with answers. It arrives with clarity. A clarity that hurts before it heals. A clarity that dismantles before it liberates. And once it lands, it asks you to choose. Will you continue performing, or will you begin becoming? This is the moment where most people freeze. The fracture terrifies them. But if you sit with it, listen to it, honor it, it becomes your compass. It doesn't demand that you change overnight. It simply asks that you stop lying to yourself, and from there, everything else will unfold. The pain didn't come to punish you, it came to speak. Not in words, but in weight. In the tension behind your eyes, the ache in your chest, the constant fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. Pain is a messenger that only delivers when you've ignored all other signals. You may have thought it was a setback or a symptom or a flaw, but what if it was your soul's last attempt to get your attention? Louise Hay used to say that every disease in the body is a message from the mind and the emotions, and when we ignore our truth, the body remembers for us. That lump in your throat when you stay silent. That tightness in your stomach when you say yes but want to say no. Those are not random. That's your truth asking to be felt. You see, the pain doesn't mean you're off path. It means your path is shifting. And in order for the new to enter, the old must speak its goodbye. That goodbye hurts because we grieve not just people or moments, but versions of ourselves. The self that tolerated too much. The self that smiled through disappointment. The self that survived by disappearing. Pain asks you to stop betraying yourself. And until you do, it will return like a loyal shadow. Have you ever noticed how pain repeats in cycles? Same theme, different players. That's not a coincidence. That's your soul creating mirrors until you finally look. The people who trigger you most often echo your deepest wounds. Not to harm you, but to show you where love was once missing. And your job isn't to fix them, it's to feel you. To hold yourself through what was never held. To validate the parts of you that were dismissed. That's the true healing. Not the perfection of a life without pain, but the power of a life that listens to it. Bob Proctor reminded us that thoughts become things, but unhealed pain becomes patterns. And if you want to change your life, you have to first sit with what created it. Pain doesn't need to be solved. It needs to be seen, held, heard. Only then does it soften. Only then does it release. And in that release, you find yourself not weaker but wiser, not broken but reassembled. You begin to recognize pain not as the enemy, but as the doorway. And you walk through it, trembling maybe, but finally awake. Becoming the new you doesn't happen in a single decision. It happens in 1,000 small choices you don't always recognize while making them. It happens when you pause before reacting, when you breathe through the urge to shrink, when you finally say no without apologizing or yes without guilt. This is the becoming, not a dramatic transformation, but a sacred remembering. You don't need to become someone else. You are shedding what you were never meant to carry in the first place. That heaviness, that hesitation, that performative. Peace, none of it was you. You were taught to wear it, shaped to hold it, trained to normalize it. But your soul always knew. The real you was waiting underneath the noise. And in these quiet acts of courage, it begins to rise. Joe Dispenza teaches that we cannot create a new future while living in the emotions of the past. That's why so many awakenings feel like grief. Because you're not just letting go of what happened, you're letting go of who you were when it did. You begin to feel the gap, the space between the old reaction and the new response. It's uncomfortable at first. The old identity pulls at you. It whispers, you're changing too fast, you're becoming too different, you'll lose everything, but you breathe and you keep going. Because the truth is, the real you was never too much. The real you is simply waiting to be chosen. Becoming the new you isn't a destination, it's a daily practice of alignment. You check in with your body, you speak with intention, you move with integrity. You no longer abandon yourself to be loved. You choose to love yourself enough not to. This journey is not linear. Some days you'll slip into the old. That's okay. The point is not perfection, it's awareness. It's choosing again, gently, bravely again. You begin to redefine success, not as validation, but as peace. You stop chasing what doesn't feel good, even if it looks good. You create space, sacred space, for joy, for rest, for wonder. And slowly, the world within begins to mirror the world you longed for outside. You are not just becoming someone new, you are creating a life that reflects the truth of who you've always been. That is power. That is healing. That is the moment when everything truly changes. The after doesn't arrive with fireworks, it arrives quietly, like a sigh you didn't know you were holding. One day you notice you're no longer triggered by what once unraveled you. You don't chase closure from people who never knew how. To hold you, you don't over-explain your boundaries. You don't negotiate your worth. The after is not the absence of pain, it's the presence of alignment. And it's not something you find, it's something you live. It begins when you realize you no longer fit into the places you used to force yourself to belong. It deepens when you see that peace is no longer boring, it's sacred. And it anchors when your decisions are no longer reactions, but reflections of your truth. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. In the after, you stop calling it fate. You start calling it choice. And that shift is everything. You begin to live differently, not louder, but more fully. You wake up and feel grateful before there's a reason. You speak kindly to yourself, not as a performance, but as a practice. You surround yourself with people who honor your wholeness, not just your usefulness. You become deliberate with your energy. You rest without guilt. You dream without limits. You trust without proof. The after is not a reward, it's a result. The result of every time you listen to the whisper, honored the fracture, sat with the pain, and chose to become anyway. It's the garden that grew from all the seeds you planted when you were still hurting. It's the chapter where your life stops being something you endure and becomes something you create. This is not a fantasy. This is the quiet revolution of self-love. This is what it looks like to come home to yourself. And as you live it, you'll forget to seek signs because you'll become one. You'll forget to beg the universe for a miracle because you'll realize you already are one. And that beautiful soul is the after. Not perfect, but free. Not without shadows, but filled with light. Not finished, but fully awake. If this story touched a part of you that words can't always reach, tell me in the comments what moment in your life changed everything. Share this with someone who's in the middle of their own shift. And if you're walking through your own after right now, say this with me out loud or in silence. I'm not who I was, and that's my power.